Now, although we know that macro workbooks have a different extension, .xlsm, what we also need to be aware of is setting our own security options within Excel to tell it how to deal with workbooks that contain macros. Now, this is controlled from the developer ribbon and macro security, and that takes us into the macro settings of the Trust Center. Now, you can get to this same place by going to File, Options, Trust Center Settings, Macro Settings. So a lot more clicks than just a single click off the ribbon. And here are our macro settings. We can either disable all macros without notification. That way, if you open a macro file, the macros within it are disabled, but you're not told there's actually any in there. The default option, and probably the most recommended, is that all macros are disabled, but there is a notification to tell you that they're disabled, with an option to enable them. We could disable all macros except digitally signed macros. Now, a digital signature for your macro is quite new, but they're becoming more and more frequent. At the moment, personally, I would still stick with disable all macros with notification. Or there is a sort of open house option, which is to enable all macros. It's not a recommended option because macros, although ours is only type in your name, can actually do a lot more damage because they can access your file system. So I'm going to leave the option with disable all macros with notification and would suggest that's what you do on your own machine. That way, when we open a file that contains a macro, we're given an option to enable or not. So if I say OK and come back to my file, if I now try and type my name, .xlsm, so I know it's a macro enabled workbook, you'll find the macros have been disabled. I've got this little yellow security warning, and I can enable the content if I so wish. So if I click enable content, I'll find that when I create a new sheet and go to the macro list, type my name is there and I can run it and it works. If I open another sample file we have in your working folder, which is called Sample Macro 2013, it's also a macro enabled file and it contains a macro. It too pops up the security warning and I can then choose to enable the content or not. Now, once you've enabled the content of a macro file, that's a one-off step. The next time you open it, Excel will remember that you enabled the content and it will keep the content enabled. So it's not an option you're going to get every time you open the file, just the first time you open the file. Giving you that step there to either allow you to enable them or not. If you don't know who the file is from, I personally would not suggest enabling the content. If it's from a colleague and they say it's got this great little macro in there for you to have a look at, then I would enable the content. Now, this particular sample macro has a macro built in, but it has a keyboard shortcut assigned to it, and that's Control, Shift and S. So I can click any cell, Control, Shift and S, runs a little macro that puts today is and the date and you are the best, but it's done it as an offset from wherever you are. So if I started here and did the same thing, Control, Shift S, it offsets before it types it in, whereas the one we created always placed it in A1. So that's an option we're going to look at, the ability to offset from the starting point. But this lesson has been about enabling your security settings, which are done under the developer ribbon, macro security. You have the 4 options. The recommended one is the second, which is to disable the macros, but with a notification, so that when you open a macro enabled file, you will get the little yellow security box for you to decide whether you want to enable the macros or not. If they're enabled, they will then run. If you choose not to enable them, then regardless of the keyboard shortcut or you choosing that macro or it having a button, it will not run because it's been disabled.